As the sun began to rise, Mrs. Marbles made her way from the kitchen to the entertainment room and began her early morning rounds. She sighed to herself and smiled as she looked past all the snoozing men in the large room. Mrs. Marbles was the Manor's maid, and she was known as the most loyal of all. She was in her mid-60s and had long grey hair that was always kept in a neat bun. Despite being widowed, she was a very cheerful woman and always appreciated the company of men. She weaved her way through the peacefully snoring men, picking up empty soda cans and food wrappers along the way. After picking up the rest of the entertainment room, Mrs. Marbles grabbed her keys and unlocked a tall door that led to a ginormous dark oak staircase. After taking one step, she noticed a black Oxford shoe lying on its side upon the third step. She smiled and went to pick it up when she noticed the other sitting on the seventh step.
Long night, huh?
She said to herself quietly, still smiling. When she got to the top of the stairs, she already had a pair of black Oxfords and a pair of matching socks in her arms. She made a left and came across another door with a lock. She opened it, and inside was a long hallway with another large door at the end. When she finally arrived to the end of the hallway, she sat down the items she had picked up and fumbled for a different set of keys. Once she found them, she unlocked the door and cautiously opened it to see more items of clothing scattered across the floor. This room was rather large, and not an ounce of sunlight seeped through the tall curtains. Mrs. Marbles, however, knew her way perfectly and stepped over all the clothes to open a part of the curtain to let a bit of morning light in. As soon as part of the curtain opened, the room revealed itself to be a master bedroom with exquisitely detailed dark oak furniture, Victorian-styled sofas, another door to the far left, and an incredible California king bed with a dark canopy. Mrs. Marbles turned to pick up the nearest article of clothing when she noticed they all had reddish-brown stains. She proceeded to pick up the stained pale orange dress shirt and smacked her lips.
This was my favourite blouse too,
she muttered to herself.
That's going to be tough to get out. Oh well.
Mrs. Marbles was fully aware of what business her employer was involved in. Her deceased husband was a mobster in Gotham for a very long time, and she longed to be around the business ever since his downfall due to mental health issues. She reminisced the days where picking up stained clothes used to be her husband's. Mrs. Marbles smiled to herself once again and placed the pile of clothing next to the door. The last piece was lying next to the bed. She walked over and picked up a heavy leather trench coat that was dark purple and heavily stained with blood. She raised her eyebrows and whispered,
Unfortunate fellow,
replied a faint sleepy voice from the bed. Mrs. Marbles placed the coat around her arm and peeped into the dark canopy. Inside were piles of pillows and blankets, and just at the corner was a mound of messy dark green and red stained hair. The man's face appeared to be buried into the pillows.
Would you like me to fetch you anything, sir?
She asked politely. After a minute of silence, the man poked his left index finger out, moved it side to side, and said, Mrs. Marbles nodded with a smile and closed the canopy. She then proceeded to finish up her early morning duties with a smile, as usual. It wasn't long before noon arrived, and the mansion walls were filled with chatter and a hint of something else.
What the hell is that noise?
Mumbled one of the beefy guys with a biscuit in his mouth. Mrs. Marbles, who happened to pass by the dining room, answered,
Why, it's music, of course.
The beefy man gave her a puzzled expression, and another guy across the table added,
Since when does boss listen to music?
That ain't even music anyway. They're just screaming, replied another. Suddenly, the music became louder, and almost everyone but Mrs. Marbles looked around curiously. Mrs. Marbles now had to yell to be heard over the music.
I know! Isn't it wonderful?
The men at the dining room table all looked at each other and shrugged. One of the beefy men smirked and said,
Maybe she's just as loony as he is.
After a few hours, the SUVs in the back rumbled to life, and the mansion was left quiet once again. With only a feather duster in hand, Mrs. Marbles had just made it to the top of the grand staircase when she stopped to check her watch. After checking it, she looked around and said to herself,
All righty, boys are gone, run is out, and the chefs are on break. The coast is clear.
She bent down to push in a small section of the brown trim near the ground. It slid back, and the wall made a faint clicking sound. She looked around at her surroundings once again and cautiously pushed in what was once a wall. Inside this opening led to a very narrow but tall hallway. At the end of this hallway was a red door with a lock that Mrs. Marbles had the keys to. She pulled out her set of different keys and grabbed a curious bronze-looking one. With this key, she opened the door to a room that automatically lit up upon her entrance. This room was a bit lengthy in size, but had a low ceiling. It was furnished with a black leather tufted sofa, an arched floor lamp, a dark oak desk, and shelves on every wall that were filled top to bottom with books. She closed the door behind her and began dusting the surfaces of the room.
He's been spending much more time in here than usual,
The maid said to herself quietly. She was about to walk over to dust the next bookshelf when her foot stepped against something unlevelled with the floor. She looked down and picked up a book that read, "Corners of the Mind, a Guide to Profound Trickery."
Busy indeed.